The political stage at the United Nations General Assembly was charged with tension, and one exchange stood out above all others. Former US President Donald Trump, once known for his unusually cordial relationship with Russian President Vladimir Putin, delivered remarks that shocked many observers. In front of Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky and world leaders, Trump dismissed the value of his personal ties to Putin, described Russia as a paper tiger, and openly shifted his stance on Ukraine's war of survival. The question dominating headlines now: did Trump just betray Putin in front of Zelensky? For years, Trump's posture toward Russia and Vladimir Putin has been one of the most debated aspects of his foreign policy. As president from 2017 to 2021, Trump often praised Putin's leadership, spoke of their good rapport, and insisted that strong personal relationships with adversarial leaders could deliver peace. Critics accused him of being too soft on the Kremlin, while supporters framed it as pragmatic diplomacy. When Trump returned to the international stage in 2025, particularly at this year's UN General Assembly, many expected him to repeat the familiar balancing act, critical of Russia's invasion but avoiding direct condemnation of Putin himself. Instead, what emerged was a new, harsher tone, one that caught both allies and rivals off guard. Trump's remarks during the UN session and his side meeting with Zelensky marked a sharp rhetorical pivot. Speaking about Russia's war in Ukraine, Trump declared, "The one that I thought would be easiest would be because of my relationship with President Putin, but he's let me down." This statement was more than a casual aside. For the first time, Trump acknowledged that his personal rapport with Putin, once touted as a diplomatic asset, had failed to deliver peace. He went further, characterizing Russia's military as far weaker than expected. Russia has proven itself a paper tiger. In the same series of comments, Trump insisted that Ukraine, with NATO and EU backing, could reclaim all its lost territory, a significant shift from earlier suggestions that Kyiv might have to negotiate territorial concessions. These lines were delivered not in isolation, but in the presence of Zelensky, whose government has repeatedly urged the US to toughen its stance on Russia. The immediate reaction was striking. President Zelensky, speaking to journalists afterward, welcomed the change of tone, calling it a big shift. He went further, suggesting that Trump may have been misled by Russian disinformation in the past. Putin was lying to Trump, Zelensky said. This framing by the Ukrainian leader underscored the perception that Trump had not only changed course, but had also chosen to expose the Kremlin's manipulation in front of the world. From Moscow, the official reaction was more cautious. The Kremlin released a statement noting that it presumes Trump is still pursuing peace efforts in Ukraine. This was less a fiery rebuttal and more a strategic ambiguity, suggesting that Russia did not want to escalate the rhetorical war just yet. Analysts read this as a sign that Moscow may be unsure whether Trump's remarks mark a true pivot or a temporary political performance. In Europe, reactions were mixed. Some European leaders cautiously welcomed Trump's new tone, interpreting it as a sign that the United States might align more closely with NATO's hard line against Moscow. Others remained skeptical, noting that no new sanctions, aid packages, or concrete measures accompanied the rhetoric. To understand whether Trump's comments amounted to betrayal, we need to look beyond words and consider context. Diplomatically, betrayal means breaking trust with an ally or partner, or reversing a previous understanding in a way that damages the other's position. For years, Trump and Putin were perceived, rightly or wrongly, as maintaining a form of mutual understanding. Putin benefited from Trump's reluctance to escalate pressure during his presidency, and Trump often claimed that his personal ties with the Russian leader could prevent global crises. Now, by declaring those ties meaningless and openly mocking Russia's strength, Trump effectively dismantled the narrative of mutual respect. Supporters of Ukraine view this as a necessary correction. Critics of Trump, however, wonder if this is simply rhetorical theatre meant to reassure NATO allies without changing underlying policy. After all, no new sanctions were announced, and Trump's team did not confirm fresh US aid commitments. Still, in public diplomacy, words matter. By choosing this platform, standing next to Zelensky at the UN, Trump ensured that his words carried symbolic weight. To many observers, that symbolism alone constituted a form of betrayal against Putin, even if practical consequences remain uncertain. The implications of Trump's pivot are complex. For Russia, the remarks signal that Trump may no longer be a predictable or sympathetic voice in global debates about Ukraine. This could complicate Moscow's diplomatic strategies, particularly as it seeks to exploit divisions within NATO. For Ukraine, the words offer hope that the US might shift back toward firmer backing, though Zelensky knows better than to rely on rhetoric alone. His calls for expanded sanctions and security guarantees remain unanswered. For Europe, the change is both an opportunity and a risk. If Trump follows through, Europe may see a more unified front against Moscow. If he does not, it may reinforce skepticism about American reliability. For Trump himself, the pivot carries political consequences at home. Critics may accuse him of inconsistency, while supporters might argue that he has finally recognized the true nature of Russia's threat. Speculation has already begun about why Trump changed course. Some analysts suggest that US intelligence briefings have finally convinced him that Russia's military and economy are weaker than he once believed. Others suspect a tactical move to appease NATO allies at a moment when the US needs European cooperation on trade and security. There are also darker theories. Was Trump misled by Putin in the past, only to realize it now? Did his earlier stance damage Ukraine's war effort? And is this pivot an attempt to repair that reputation? Some conspiracy-minded commentators argue that internal US political pressures, perhaps even influence from the so-called deep state, pushed Trump to harden his rhetoric against Moscow. What is certain is that the timing, audience, and framing of these remarks were deliberate. Trump chose to distance himself from Putin publicly, with Zelensky at his side. Whether that represents betrayal, realignment, or calculated showmanship remains the subject of debate. To put Trump's remarks into perspective, it helps to recall moments in modern history when leaders shifted their tone dramatically toward foreign counterparts. During the Cold War, US presidents often balanced between public condemnation of the Soviet Union and quiet back-channel negotiations. Richard Nixon's opening to China in 1972 was one such pivot. A leader who had built his career on fierce anti-communism, suddenly embracing Beijing as a strategic partner. Similarly, Ronald Reagan's early denunciations of the evil empire eventually gave way to arms control talks with Mikhail Gorbachev. Trump's reversal with Putin sits somewhere in this spectrum. Unlike Nixon or Reagan, he is not transitioning from hostility to engagement, but rather from personal warmth to open criticism. This is unusual in modern diplomacy. Leaders often escalate toward rivals. Rarely do they disown friendships once paraded as achievements. For Trump, this shift may reflect a reassessment of Russia's weakened position in 2025. Western sanctions, battlefield losses, and economic decline have eroded Moscow's leverage. By calling Russia a paper tiger, Trump positioned himself as recognizing this new reality, even if the policy substance has yet to catch up with the rhetoric. While the factual record is clear, Trump did denounce Putin's reliability, downgrade their relationship, and call Russia weak. The motivations and consequences remain open to speculation. Zelensky's comment that Putin was lying to Trump resonates with critics who long argued that the Kremlin fed disinformation to Western leaders. If true, Trump's pivot could be read as anger at being deceived, transforming once friendly rhetoric into a personal rebuke. With US voters weary of endless wars but wary of Russian aggression, Trump may be threading a needle. By appearing tougher on Putin while avoiding new aid commitments, he gains political capital at home without locking himself into costly military support abroad. European partners have pressured Washington to hold firm on Russia. Trump's comments, delivered at the UN in front of world leaders, may have been designed to reassure allies that he will not abandon Ukraine, at least rhetorically. Some analysts see the pivot not only as a statement on Russia, but also as a signal to Beijing. By publicly rejecting Putin, Trump highlights that even strongman relationships can sour, warning China against overconfidence in its ties with Moscow. There are darker readings too. Some commentators suggest that US intelligence services have cornered Trump into hardening his stance, undermining his autonomy. Others whisper about hidden deals, perhaps involving Ukraine's mineral resources or NATO's future strategy, where betrayal of Putin is merely a prelude to another arrangement. None of these theories are proven, but they reflect the fog of geopolitics. Facts intermingle with speculation, and public betrayal often masks private negotiation. One of the most telling aspects of this episode is Russia's muted response. Kremlin officials said they presume Trump is still pursuing peace efforts despite his harsh language. Why the restraint? Part of the answer may lie in Russia's diplomatic isolation. Engaged in a grinding war, reliant on limited partners such as China, North Korea and Iran, Moscow can ill afford a direct rupture with Washington, even if symbolic. Publicly lashing out at Trump would only deepen Russia's image as embattled and cornered. Instead, the Kremlin appears to be waiting, assessing whether Trump's remarks were a tactical performance or a true policy pivot. This patience itself speaks volumes. Russia cannot be sure whether Trump remains an unpredictable partner or a newly hardened adversary. For Ukraine, Trump's words carry both promise and peril. On the one hand, Zelensky seized the moment, calling it a big shift and framing it as evidence that Trump recognizes Putin's deceit. Such rhetoric bolsters Ukrainian morale and signals international alignment. On the other hand, Ukraine has learned to be cautious. Since the war began, lofty statements from world leaders have not always translated into concrete action. Ukraine's urgent needs, weapons, air defense systems, financial aid, cannot be met by rhetoric alone. If Trump's pivot stops at words, Kyiv may find itself once again in limbo, celebrated in speeches but short of resources on the battlefield. If, however, the rhetoric foreshadows renewed US leadership in sanctioning Russia or boosting NATO coordination, Ukraine could see tangible benefits. Beyond the immediate war, the stakes are global. Trump's betrayal of Putin, if it is indeed betrayal, signals that personal diplomacy cannot override hard geopolitical realities. For years, Putin cultivated an image of strength, both domestically and abroad. Trump's words strike directly at that image, calling Russia weak and unreliable. Such a narrative, if sustained, could erode Moscow's leverage in negotiations not only with the West, but also with partners like Beijing and Tehran. At the same time, Trump's unpredictability raises concerns about whether the United States is a consistent partner for Ukraine and Europe. The broader question is whether this pivot is a one-off performance or the start of a sustained shift in US foreign policy. Allies and adversaries alike are watching closely. So, did Trump betray Putin in front of Zelensky? The evidence points to a rhetorical betrayal at the very least. By openly declaring that his personal relationship with Putin meant nothing and branding Russia a paper tiger, Trump dismantled the very foundation of the narrative he once built, that personal diplomacy could deliver peace. Whether this betrayal translates into action remains to be seen. Without new sanctions, aid packages, or military commitments, the words may remain symbolic. Yet in global politics, symbolism matters. For Ukraine, for Europe, and for Russia, the spectacle of Trump publicly breaking from Putin carries weight of its own. The world now waits to see whether Moscow retaliates, whether Washington follows through, and whether Zelensky can turn this moment of rhetorical victory into real strategic gains. As for the audience, the question lingers: was this genuine betrayal political theatre or both? The only certainty is that the Trump-Zelensky encounter has reshaped the narrative of this war, at least for now.